is Thursday, the 18th of May, 2017, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK, and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
Marsh, we've had problems recently with people emailing you stories about placebo and emailing me stories about PR.
Have we had those?
And I don't understand, because I think we sound vastly different to each other.
I think we sound vastly different. I think people know the difference. They just like to piss us off.
You think they're just trolling?
Yeah, I think they're just trolling.
Because I think we've got quite different voices.
I think so.
I'm Mike.
Yeah, I'm Marsh.
Hello. And I do the placebo stuff, and I like Doctor Who.
Yes, and your voice stays at almost the same range at all times. You've got a very narrow band range of
These are things I don't know about myself.
I would say your voice.
Is that true? Mike squeaks quite a lot.
I don't think he squeaks as much as I do. I think my resting voice is slightly lower than Mike's, so it has a little bit more bass than Mike's. But I go very high all the time while I'm talking. I get all excited and go very high.
You do get quite high when you get excited. That's
so
true.
I think I range a bit more than Mike, whereas Mike is in a narrower, less expressive band of vocal vocalization.
You've got a clear northeastern accent.
I don't think I'm not sure I've still got a clear northeastern accent. It's still there, but it's not clear.
It's clear.
It's not sure.
It is pretty clear.
It's obvious.
You guys are used to it.
You're sitting there going, "Well, aye, man, I didn't think I'm talking like a proper northeast or anything like proper man like champion Hinny Gadgy why I fight Jimmy Neal."
Yeah,
that's how you sound all the time.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
And I've kind of got a strange northern accent with a little bit of northwestern in it. Even though I am northeastern, that doesn't come across in my words.
Yours is like generic north.
It is generic north.
It's like how Americans went for that like mid-Atlantic type accent.
Yes,
you've gone for mid-Pennines.
Yeah,
I guess. I've
got a Pennines accent.
You've got a Pennines accent. Yeah,
just standing on the peak of a mountain,
right on the Pennine Way. You are that point in the motorway that says this is the highest point of motorway. You are the guy in the farm on the M62. That's what your accent is. Just that guy on the farm in near Hartshead Moor.
And no one ever confuses us with Alice.
They don't.
And I can't think why that might be.
Not a clue.
Haven't the faintest idea why that might. Presumably because neither of us are doctors.
That is clearly it.
I'm going to guess that's what
a doctor's sound about my voice.
Someone recently described us, wrote to us as Doctor and her companions.
I like that.
Which I thought would tick both your boxes and alienate me, which is probably what they were going for. Speaking of which, what do you make of the calls for Phoebe Waller-Bridge to be the next Doctor?
I don't know who that is, so
it's
I don't care.
Woman who wrote and starred in Fleabag.
I never finished watching it.
It was really good.
I only watched the first 3 or 4 episodes.
It was really good. It's one of my favourite programmes of the last couple of years.
Is she a good actress?
She's a fantastic actress.
Down for that, then.
She's absolutely fantastic.
That's my single defining criteria on being a doctor. Yeah. Is are you good at acting? Can you act? Can you do act?
It's worth watching Fleabag. I think it's one of the it's one of the best comedies or comedy drama things that we've produced in the last couple of years as a country. Absolutely amazing. I think you weren't as keen. You loved it.
I really liked the first episode, and then it kind of trailed off a bit for me, and I never finished watching it. So
yeah, but watch it, and then you'll see. Like, oh yeah, she probably would be. You can see her as a doctor thing.
Okay.
I mean, I don't watch Doctor Who, so it means now to me. But I read it in a newspaper or online or something that she's now being tipped.
So, what have you guys been doing?
We had your birthday.
We celebrated your birthday.
We did a birthday thing for you.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
We did an escape. We got out of a room.
We did another escape room for my birthday, which was quite good. I enjoyed the escape room that I was in, which was kind of sci-fi themed. We had to save the world from an asteroid that was coming in to destroy the thing. So what we had to do was fix the nuclear launch bunker thing, and then fire a missile up and destroy the asteroid
destroying the planet
in order to rain devastation over a wider area and kill more people.
Yeah,
because whoever devised that room does not know physics.
Would it kill more people?
Potentially.
Well, I don't know, because isn't the problem with a big one hitting? You end up with like the cloud, a bigger cloud.
You get a nuclear winter,
and that will
ultimately it's the same amount of mass hitting the planet
with the same amount of force.
So it's probably not going to make that much of a difference. What we should have done is you have to launch the spaceship. You've got 3 months before it hits.
Yes, yeah.
Launch a gravity tug to just go and sit next to it for the next 3 months to just slowly draw it off course.
Yeah.
it probably doesn't have the drama and the 3-month countdown to get out of that room.
Gravity Tug.
Bit much.
Gravity Tug isn't a great name for it. It sounds like what Michael Collins did in space when the other astronauts were on the moon.
Oh, Michael Collins jokes. That's.
I did not know his name going into the start of that sentence.
Did you not?
And I remembered it two words before. Nice. I was pretty happy with.
Okay.
No, the escape room was pretty good. We were in the same room.
Me and Marsh were, yeah.
You did a kind of wizard room, didn't you?
No, we were in the prison
room.
Prison room.
We were locked behind bars, literally.
You were in. Okay.
Right behind bars. Getting out of the bars was pretty easy.
I don't know. Before we got out of the bars, we spent a long time walking around going, this is really hard, not knowing what we were doing. And then suddenly we just figured something out.
Well, we were missing one key that was in a book that we hadn't bothered looking in.
Yeah.
The only book that wasn't a book. We didn't bother looking at it. And it wasn't a book. It was just a box with a key in it.
But when you were,
I don't know why they had a box with a key in it to let you out of the cell. In the cell, this is a
pretty easy prison to get out of.
But it took us a long time to get out of the actual room that the prison cell was in.
Yeah.
So it turns out that the standard door with a lock was way more secure than the massive iron bars and things. Yeah.
And weren't you a massive dickhead?
Yeah.
Oh, God. One of my favourite things ever, I think, was that for some reason in the bathroom of this prison cell, there was a severed hand.
Right.
Just bog standard.
Severed hand.
Clearly, this is based on a current UK prison system where it's descended into such carnage and violence from chronic underfunding and poor staffing and things like that there are just severed hands lying around. So I took the rubber severed hand and Alice was over working on a number combination lock and very intently focused on that. So obviously I walked up, leaned over her shoulder to have a look what she was doing, and also put the rubber hand on her shoulder at the same time.
Right.
And then walked away, thinking she'd spotted immediately. About a minute or two went by, and then suddenly Alice screams at the top of her lungs and is shaking. It's like, oh, you fucking dickhead. At which point she'd noticed the rubber hand.
I think it's interesting that Alice screamed and called you a dickhead. I said you were a massive dickhead, weren't you? And you said it's the best thing I've ever done. It's my favourite thing that's ever happened in the world.
It's one of my favourite things that's ever happened. Because you
I didn't clock at all.
No, and how did you realise it was there?
I turned my head and my head brushed the hand and then squealed and it landed on the floor.
Just for the listeners there, Marsh literally fist pumped at the point.
So it's like,
but then for the next half an hour, I could feel it on the back of my head where my head had brushed past it.
Oh, so good! Have you ever done something where it's come off way better than you ever anticipated? You're like,
I mean, this show.
Yeah,
that's
I'm really pleased with how that worked out. That's where I am right now. I'm really pleased with how that worked out.
Nice. Okay.
So I've been doing that. That's all. I've not been doing much else. Watched the first series of Buffy.
You watched the
whole first
of Buffy?
series now. You and Nick carried on without me. That's not fair.
Well, you aren't present in our marriage on quite the high percentage that either Nick or I are.
It's a funny one, the first series of Buffy, because it's a half season. Everyone was doing 22 episodes, 13, 10, 12, 13 episode seasons are very common now. But at the time, everyone was doing 22, 24 episode seasons. So it's only a half season because they were a bit unsure about it initially. And it's very Monster of the Week early Buffy as well.
Isn't it always that all the way through?
No, they get more story arc. Like season 7 is basically one big long season-long arc. They get more confident with that as they realise that they're not getting cancelled.
I'm going to be watching my way through. We probably shouldn't dwell too much on it because we talk about Buffy a lot on this show anyway.
I don't think we do. We mentioned it a few times the last few episodes. We talk about it a lot in real life, but on the podcast I don't think we mention it that much.
Okay. Not as much as Doctor Who, obviously.
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, that's
a given.
So how are you finding Buffy? You enjoying Buffy?
I'm remembering, I've only watched it once. I think I watched it when I was on telly, and I probably missed some episodes here and there because it was back when it was on actual telly.
Yeah.
And if you missed it, you missed it. It's good. It's all right. I find Xander really fucking annoying.
He's
a shit
Xander.
character, badly written.
I really like
paper
Xander.
thin.
Really like Xander.
Certainly first series, he's paper thin bollocks.
And there's an episode of Buffy that I really like where Xander gets split in two and he gets split into two people and a kind of evil version of Xander.
Doesn't everyone hate that episode? Isn't it one of the least good favourite episodes ever?
Normally, every episode I dislike and every episode I skip when I watch Buffy are the ones that are mainly Xander, like the Zeppo and the hyena one. But
I didn't like the hyena one. I didn't like the hyena one at all.
But that one I don't mind. I think that one's quite good.
What I thought was quite good, it wasn't.
But that's when his character's a lot more developed and stuff, and
he's
there's more going on.
in the first series. He's one-dimensional bollock.
But he's split. He's not evil Xander and good Xander. He's kind of loser Xander and suave Xander. Like it's just the worst aspects of his personality, and the best aspect, which is probably actually a rip-off from an original Star Trek episode. I think it's called Enemy Within, where Kirk gets split in two by a transporter accident into good Kirk and evil Kirk, which was written by Richard Matheson, who wrote I Am Legend. Because he did scripts for the original Star Trek, and whose son, Chris Matheson, wrote Bill and Ted and was on Incredulous.
Nice. Okay.
There we go.
6 degrees of separation.
We can get that in there. But when they usually when you've got like characters split in two for TV shows, they have to do a lot of split screen work.
Yeah.
Not for Xander. He's got a twin brother.
Just
hired him in to come and play the other Xander, which I thought was quite good.
Do you think all twins could get away with that? Are there any other actors that are twins? I'll just bring him in. It's fine. I can't be asked to do it. Get
just
Steve
bring the twin in. I know in Orange is the New Black, they've got a character who is a trans woman, and the pre-transition version of that character in flashbacks is played by her own twin brother, which I think is quite nice as well.
Yeah, that's useful.
So I thought that was
that. I mean, if that wasn't planned, that's fucking lucky.
I don't know.
If they weren't hiring based on that, like, okay, we need an actress to play this trans person, so we need someone who also has a twin brother, so we can play out the full
who can play the flashback scenes.
Yeah.
I don't know if that just worked out nicely or not. They've just done.
If not, I mean, that's a really tight casting brief. They must have. Is the actress in the show shit? Because it would make sense if she was absolutely terrible. Because what you need,
because it's literally the only person in Spotlight that you could find with those characteristics.
Who A is a twin,
yeah.
B has a twin of the other gender,
yeah.
and C, the other gender twin is also an actor.
Yeah.
So because you'd need them both to be able to act, otherwise you might end up with a complete cartos playing her in the early stages of life.
Yeah, she's actually quite good. She's quite good. But on Buffy, I read an article recently about the new high definition versions of Buffy. Because they've done new HD versions of Buffy.
Yeah.
And the problem is that American TV in the 90s was made... they would shoot it on film. They would shoot it on 35mm film, but then they would edit it on videotape.
Yeah, which is why if you ever watch Friends, A, it's shit because it was the 90s and it was Friends, and B, it feels like you've got cataracts. The early series of Friends feels like you've got cataracts.
Because it's all on NTSC videotape and it looks a fucking state. And that's what they did with Buffy, which means all the visual effects were done on videotape and they were done at standard definition resolution and all the editing was done on videotape, etc. There is no HD version of Buffy available. So what they had to do to make the HD version was go back to the original negatives out the camera, rescan those at HD, and then re-edit all the episodes from scratch and put the HD... redo all the visual effects in HD and put those in there.
That's probably not a bad thing because the visual effects are shit in the first series. They are hilariously bad.
Well, because what they've done, however, they did this with Star Trek. They did it with Star Trek The Next Generation, and they went through and redid all the effects from scratch. They did it with Star Trek The Original Series, where they redid all the effects from scratch. And it was all done very similarly. So it was made to look like it was of the period, so that it doesn't look ridiculous flashy in 21st century. In the 60s Star Trek, they've done it so it looked like it was done in the 60s, just very, very well.
Yeah.
And it's obviously done with a lot of care and love and attention. Buffy, no. It is done with no care, love, and attention.
Really?
It is fucking terrible. So Buffy, for example, used a lot of day for night shooting because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So they would shoot in the day and then just use filters afterwards to make it look dark. When they've done the HD re-edit, they haven't put the day for night filters on. So you've got scenes of Buffy lying in bed in broad daylight for no reason. She's just lying in bed, the sun's streaming through the curtains because it's meant to have a filter on that to make it look like it was dark. They didn't bother. There's a scene where... Buffy is on a beach. I don't remember if it's a dream
sequence. How do you know all this?
Because I'm a nerd. She's on the beach and she's there and it's sunset and you can see the sun is going down and it's a very metaphorical scene. It's about the end of a relationship with Angel and Angel comes over and he hugs her from behind and the sun's going down and it's this quite sledgehammer metaphor, to be fair.
Yeah.
But, they're doing this kind of didn't bother putting the sunset effect in, so it's just Buffy on the beach.
Nice.
Just wandering around on the beach. Angel in broad daylight wanders up to her. Hello. It's like, no, you should be dead. What on earth is going going on? So mistakes like that all the way through. They changed the visual effects for the first season. So the vampires, which kind of fall into ash, instead they kind of puff into smoke until about halfway through the second season when they found the original CG files and just started re-rendering them in HD. So the effects are all different until halfway through the third season. And then in several sequences, just use different takes. So scenes of like, you know, a character running across the thing, it's like, it's close enough, and we'll just put that take, completely different take to the one that was used in the original.
Lazy bastards.
Massively shit. So no love, care, and attention. No one who actually gives a shit about Buffy worked on this fucking project, as far as I can see. It was absolutely horrendous.
Blimey.
So avoid HD Buffy.
I will attempt to. I'm going to start this week, as I do often enough, with a couple of stories from the Mail Online, both of which were from last week. Okay, so the first was written by Joe Gould, and it starts like this. All you need to taste the sunshine is a fork. We show you how to eat your way around the Mediterranean this summer.
All you need to taste the sunshine
is a fork. We show you how to eat your way around the Mediterranean. Okay?
Is a fork.
So I'll give you the first couple of paras of the story. One of the great joys of holidaying is the eating indulgence. Whether it's a bowl of silky pasta dressed in the best local olive oil, fresh shellfish straight from the sea, or the finest French cheeses, dinner abroad is always a delight. And nowhere is more popular than the Mediterranean for Brits looking to chase the sunshine. With each country offering its own distinct culture, heritage and flair, we're spoilt for choice, having everywhere from Italy to Turkey within a few hours' flight. But what if you can enjoy some of the Mediterranean's most fabulous foods in the comfort of your own home? Thanks to M&S, now you can. They sent a crack team of their top foodie development bods to travel extensively around the Med, tasting, researching and sourcing the best flavours, suppliers and dishes to produce this year's Spirit of Summer range of authentic Mediterranean meals, salads, dips, desserts and everything in between.
So Marks and Spencer's have reinvented the Italian food.
Apparently so.
Reinvented Italian food.
Apparently so. Anything jump out at you in there at all? Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. You probably get some ideas what's going on there. So that was the article written by Joe Gould for the Mail Online. Here's another article. This is one that's written by Mark Jackson for the Mail Online. Worried about your beach style this summer? Take inspiration from the A-list and pick the look that works for your personality and your body type.
Oh, okay.
And then the article goes on to match different styles of swimwear to different personality types. The sporty type, the vibrant Club Tropicana type, the poolside poser, and the free-spirited hippie. These are the ones that it kind of brings out.
Which describes every human being on the planet.
All the human beings on the planet right there.
Yeah.
If you read the article, something jumps out in a paragraph dedicated to the sporty swimwear. I'll read you the paragraph. No matter what your beach personality, there is a huge range of stunning swimwear at Debenhams this summer, including exclusive new collections by Jasper Conran, Butterfly by Matthew Williamson and Floozy by Frost French. So Debenhams there. In fact, the word Debenhams is even hyperlinked. And if you click on that, it takes you through to the Good Sport swimwear range on the Debenhams website.
Okay.
Straight into that specific range. And there's similar links accompanying all of the other personality types too there, heading you to the Debenhams website. So if you are interested in the Club Tropicana type, there's a link in there. It takes you to the Club Tropicana range.
Have you seen the thing that Dove have been doing with the
bottles?
The body type bottles?
No.
So they've started doing, I think it's just their moisturiser, but they do them in different shaped bottles for different body types. So little stubby chubby bottle, tall slim curvy bottle, pear-shaped bottle, apple-shaped bottle, not pear-shaped as in pear and apple, is in the traditional body type thing. As in the sense that you're going to buy the bottle that matches your... What?
That makes no sense.
What?
Are they all the same capacity?
I think they're all the same volume. They're just doing it. It just seems really misguided to me. Really misguided to me.
They fuck up quite a lot, Dove do, though, don't they? I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about Dove as a brand because they're owned by the same company that owns Lynx.
Unilever.
And so you've got on the one hand you've got this company going love your body, the Real Women campaign, etc. etc. And on the other hand you've got the Lynx effect. Put on this body spray and women will be hanging off you, and it makes the whole Real Women stuff that they're doing with Dove seem really disingenuous.
Well, it is. It's hugely disingenuous. It's hugely cynical. I mean, there'll be different marketing teams. Dove will have a marketing team. Lynx will have a marketing team. But the fact that the parent company may not even have that much control over either side of it. But it's pretty clear that they're playing to a specific specific market, and it's just marketing at that market what they think will get them to sell, and taking on the ephemera of social responsibility as Dove do is just a sales technique as much as anything else. So back to the Debenhams stuff here. You've got all these links going into the different Debenhams parts. All the images in this story for Debenhams are all copyrighted Debenhams at the bottom. So you might start to make some assumptions about what's going on with these two stories. Anyone want to sort of hazard?
No, the stories themselves are marked as copyright Debenhams.
The images in the story, so all the photos of the different types of body types and things are all copyright Debenhams.
Okay.
So what do you think is going on with this?
I mean, in the initial blush, it would seem to be a PR.
You might think it's PR. If it is, I'd argue this isn't actually a case of bad PR. Or if it is, it's a type that deserves a category all of its own. This is native advertising or sponsored content.
Right.
Which I think is quite different from PR. And when you listen back or look back at the way that the story, certainly the MSN one, is written, thanks to MSN, now you can. They sent a crack team of their top foodie developers. It's pure advertising speak. It's not even trying to pretend that it's news. But if you were to look at this on the page, it's a news story. It's linked it through an exactly news story. People might not be fully familiar with what native advertising or sponsored content or content marketing or advertorial content is. So it's probably worth a quick explanation. Those words are basically, by and large, overlapping terms for around the same thing. The advertising world and the marketing world hasn't quite coalesced around a consistent term for across the board here.
Sure.
So it's worth looking at what it actually is. We all know what an advert is. You turn the page in newspaper, you see a small box or a half page or a full page space that a company has paid to rent, and they can put pretty much whatever they want in that space within some boundaries, both in terms of taste and decency and also in terms of the physicality of the space. But crucially, the content of the ad isn't controlled at all by the editorial staff of the newspaper. They don't get a say on what that ad says, but it's okay because it's really clear that it's an ad. It's like a full page. You can tell an advert for Wrigley's Chewing Gum is an advert for Wrigley's Chewing Gum. You've got a big face there eating chewing gum, you've got your strapline on, you've got a big picture of the you're not going to mistake that for an article. It's clear that this is not editorial content, this is an advert. Simply, you're browsing around your news site online or your tech blog or a science magazine or anything similar to that or anything really, you typically, across the banner in the top or the boxes to the right, you'll see spaces that are rented to companies to advertise themselves. And everyone knows what an ad in that space looks like. Everyone can imagine exactly what that's like. But what if those ads are designed to look exactly like newspaper articles? If the design of the ad is such that it looks indistinguishable from the editorial content that's around it, it's easy to imagine the readers might not realise it's an ad, and that's where things start to get very muddy.
Yeah.
If you're dressing your advert up with all the layout and textile of the publication that you're placing it in, all of a sudden it looks like the publication is the one that's touting the benefits of your company. There's no longer this line between advert space and commercial space and editorial space. And this isn't a new technique. By no stretch of the imagination is this a new technique. I'm sure we've all flicked through the newspaper to see that page, often touting something like a miraculous gadget for chopping courgettes or a cruise ship deal that, when you look at it, it really looks an awful lot like an article. But when you look closely, it'll say at the top, advertorial or sponsored by company X or anything like that at the top of the bottom. And in fact, when you look at the Daily Mail articles that I quote, each of them I quoted earlier, each of them contains a little line in italics just below the headline that says sponsored by Debenhams or sponsored by M&S. And when you scroll down the Daily Mail's sidebar of shame and you see all the little stubs for the stories there, you'll see the word sponsored in a couple of them.
Sure.
And that's for these. But that is that's their being transparent about this. Except if you're not paying attention, you could very easily miss those small clues. And those are really the only overt clues. The fact that it says sponsored in the cutout on the sidebar and just below the headline. Those are the only real overt clues that allow you to spot that this is an advert. Otherwise, you could easily mistake this for an actual article, and it's designed to be exactly that way. The Daily Mail aren't the only ones doing this, of course. I pick out the Daily Mail because they're the easiest ones to kind of find it on because you've got that sidebar of shame. But with a quick Google, I found that the New York Times ran a piece analysing the influence of mechanization in retail, which was paid for and posted by Adobe. And another one was all about how, in the New York Times, all about how wonderful Ellis Island in New York is, which is paid for and posted by Airbnb. In both cases, the article actually had a wrapper at the top, like a sticky menu bar, which said paid for and posted by Airbnb with the Airbnb logo. So there's the transparency there. But again, if you weren't looking for that bit, you could easily miss it. The Telegraph are much less obvious with some of their sponsored content. They've got an entire section of their website that's dedicated to good news stories. If you go to telegraph.co.uk/good-news, that's then good news section. Mm-hmm. The stories themselves aren't paid for by anyone, at least not as far as I can tell. They're legit stories, as best as I could tell. I mean, it gets muddy because I'll come to that in a moment. But the whole section of the site is actually introduced with the following blurb. The easiest way to improve your mood and your life is to take time each day to focus on the simple things that bring you joy. To that end, The Telegraph has teamed up with 7Cs to bring you uplifting, feel-good news stories each day. Take a few minutes to read something happy, and don't forget to share your own bit of good news on social media for your chance to win luxury prizes from 7Cs. Every article that's posted in the good news section has the 7Cs logo at the top of it, beneath the headline. Above the headline is the section title, so your breadcrumbs, and it's breadcrumbed, good news, 7Cs. All the articles have the URL telegraph.co.uk/good news /7Cs. Mm-hmm. So you've got all these stories being published to a national newspaper with 7Cs in there. I'll come to that in a second too. At the bottom of every article is that same paragraph about improving your mood with the sponsor name in there too. And at the bottom of the articles that I saw, they also had some related articles. You get these kind of articles from around the web type stuff.
Yeah.
These were headed brought to you by 7Cs. On the article that I read, 3 of them were links to pieces on 7C's own website advertising their products, and the 4th was from Boots entitled 3 for 2 across selected 7C's products. There's a few interesting things in here for me. For one, the fact that the URL has got 7C's peppered throughout that page on a national newspaper, that's given 7C's website probably quite a lot of Google juice, I'd imagine. Those stories are going to come up. It's going to sort of get a few more links out there. The other thing is, when you see the stories that get posted into the good news section, they're just general stories, but those stories themselves could be PR for someone else. Mm-hmm. There could be a normal bad PR type piece that ends up being there, categorized as good news, and every one of them carries this extra little wrapper, an extra little bump for 7Cs. Mm-hmm. You might not notice that the reason these stories are being promoted isn't necessarily because they're news, because they have to fill something in their good news section sponsored by 7Cs in order to keep that sponsorship deal. Mm. So you got 7Cs with basically a thumb on the till, a thumb on the
Scale,
a thumb on the scale as to what makes it the news, influencing stories there.
Yeah.
Native advertising actually everywhere at the moment, and it's easy to understand why. I've spoken a lot in the past about the financial issues that are hitting the media right now. People aren't buying newspapers, so there's a significant drop in revenue from the fact that there aren't as many actual, literal, physical subscribers anymore. Mm-hmm. Then you factor in the fact that people don't pay for subscriptions to newspapers online either, by and large. People expect news just comes to them for free.
Yeah.
But journalism actually costs money. And if there's less coming in from subscribers, the money's got to come from somewhere, and that's through advertising. Except direct advertising is also down. I mean, adverts aren't necessarily bad. Mm-hmm. Effectively, they're kind of a necessary evil when it comes to news. They're the thing we have to cope with if we want journalism to exist, which would be fine, of course, if it were the case that the best journalism attracted the highest advertising revenue and there was a good commercial relationship there. So the money is where the best journalism is. Clearly, advertising is paying for good journalism.
Oddly enough, it's quite the opposite is the case. So BuzzFeed, for example, are doing some great journalism now. And we were quite critical of BuzzFeed early on.
Oh, yeah.
We was on the show complaining about the BuzzFeedification of the news. Because what they're doing is the top 10 internet cutest kittens shit that they're publishing is what's bringing in the ad clicks that then pays for their journalists to go out and do real stuff and ask real hard questions of real people where it counts.
I find BuzzFeed fascinating because, I was going to say in a moment, but their CEO has said 100% of their revenue comes from native advertising. They sell sponsored pieces of the top 10 bits and bobs for this, that and the other, sponsored by Microsoft or McCain's Oven Chips or whatever, and that pays for the legitimate journalism that they're doing, and they're doing some really good stuff. And we've had a few pieces with BuzzFeed recently. They managed to get Tom Chivers from the Telegraph to come over as one of their science correspondents, a science journalist, and he does fantastic work. And to poach someone or to get someone to move from a national newspaper who's already in a pretty good position shows that it's a strength that's actually working. But yeah, we are in this place where if advertising paid for the best, if the most advertising was going to the best journalism, that'd be great. Sadly, that isn't the case. In fact, ironically, it's much more likely to be the opposite, because the stories that had the most outlandish headlines and scandalous content are going to attract the most visitors, which earns the highest advertising income as a result. In 2016, the Mail Online's revenue was £93 million. No wonder the Mail Online published more than 700 stories every day. Each one is another chance for unique clicks, which ups their advertising power. So if ads are a necessary evil, you might ask whether there's anything wrong with native advertising. But it has come under a lot of criticism of late. So back in 2014, John Oliver, excellent TV show Last Week Tonight, did a whole segment on native advertising, explaining exactly what he believes to be the problem in it. And he's right, I think. There's always been this rule in journalism that a wall has to be maintained between advertising and editorial to maintain the credibility of the publication, the independence of their journalism. It's often referred to as the separation between church and state. It's got that level of import in journalism. So when that wall started to erode by allowing adverts to disguise themselves as article and by accepting payment to publish content under the masthead of a publication which you didn't write, it's easy to see why people are outraged. But I think to sort of break from what I was going to say for a little while, the fact that you get the advertising revenue going to the stories that are most scandalous, I think is actually way more important than people have necessarily noticed. Because I think that's what gave rise to clickbait, first and foremost.
Yes. Is
that those attention-grabbing headlines, the evolution of that, it's kind of the commercial natural selection of it, that those who figured out how to press your buttons, how to play on the curiosity gap, how to enrage your sense of curiosity enough to click through, are the ones who get rewarded with the highest ad revenue. So you have this kind of survival of the fittest escalation of clickbait. And then we saw the last election in America and things that are coming out at the moment, the great Guardian piece about the role of social media and those type of things in the Leave campaign. Mm-hmm. And that was weaponized clickbait. It was using exactly the same type of techniques, and you saw it hugely in America. The wherever all was coming from, huge bots pumping out bullshit stories from Russia. They were using clickbait techniques in order to stoke up emotions, thoughts, and direct people towards certain propaganda, and things like the Pizzagate kind of bullshit flourished as a result of it. That's weaponized clickbait. Clickbait came around in part because we have a lowering of revenue in journalism, so they need to accept more dubious forms of advertising. And we've got the more widespread acceptance of native advertising because it's more effective, because it doesn't look like an advert. Mm-hmm. I think those two things have kind of together led to a rise in clickbait, which was weaponized into the propaganda ahead of the last election. I think there's almost a straight line there. Mm-hmm. There's a few other kind of factors that play into it, which I'd like to kind of maybe come back to some other time. The other thing is, there's a bit of a scandal here in the UK. Not a scandal, but people on the left, such as myself, were kind of annoyed by seeing front pages of local newspapers all over the country declaring wonderful things about the Conservative government. I don't know if you saw that recently. Like hundreds, or well, certainly dozens of local newspapers all had identical front pages.
Right.
And I saw a lot of people who were on the left, as myself, a lot of people saying, "Oh, we live in a free press. Look at the propaganda of the government." Every one of these local newspapers is all showing exactly the same front page.
Yeah.
It wasn't a front page. It was an advert.
It was a wraparound advert.
It was a wraparound advert.
With a real newspaper inside.
Designed to look exactly like the front page of that newspaper. Yeah. Designed to look like that was the headline. Now, how many people who don't get that newspaper walk past it on the shelf and see loads of newspapers all declaring how wonderful the current government is from a newspaper masthead that they would otherwise recognise? I think these native advertising techniques are stepping over a line, and I think that they are a concern. So I think, so going back to what John Oliver was saying, I agree. Adding little tags like sponsored content here and there on articles hardly absolves the publication from its ethical and professional compromise. Even more so when they conveniently disguise or hide or even entirely omit that warning. And I've seen that done. The tiniest little disguised warning somewhere at the top or the bottom, or a single line to show that this was an advertorial. But here's the twist. Compared to the kind of PR that I talk about and write about a lot, native advertising and sponsored content is downright moral. It's downright honest. Think about it. How many times have I talked on the show about articles that appear in the mainstream press which can be tracked back to a PR company verbatim? Mm-hmm. In those cases, the press release is issued by the PR company. It makes it in the news completely unchanged. Not a single line of editing has taken place. So no newspaper editorials happened here. The newspapers published content written by a commercial organisation with a purely commercial intent without touching it and put it under their editorial masthead. How does that differ from native advertising? On one hand, you've got a company who wants to get their message out, so they write a few hundred words of copy and they give money to a newspaper to print it under the label of sponsored content. On the other hand, a company who wants to get their message out writes a few hundred words of copy and pays a PR company to give it to a newspaper to print it under the label of actual news. That's the situation we're in right now. Mm-hmm. The only real difference is that when it comes to sponsored content, the newspaper's actually making some money out of it, which might in turn be spent on actual journalism, as we see with BuzzFeed. When it comes to sponsored content, they flag it up. Mm-hmm. They put it under, they often stick a little logo on there for the company that brought it out. They don't do that for PR. So I agree that people should be shocked when they find out how prevalent sponsored content is. And a lot of people are very shocked when they see those segments on John Oliver and things like that about it. And what that means for the quality and the accuracy and the independence of the press, I think those are shocking. But I'd argue that they're only shocked because the newspaper are being honest enough about their dishonesty. They're being professional about their unprofessionalism by putting a label on it. When it comes to the daily, relentless tidal wave of PR that makes it into the press unchecked and unchanged on a daily basis, it's hidden and it's unflagged, so people never know to be outraged by it, and they never notice it.
I talk about science quite a lot.
You do?
I do.
That is true.
But I don't really discuss what I actually do all that much. I mean, I say I'm a cancer researcher, but I don't actually go into what I actually do. Don't worry, this isn't like a short introduction to my thesis or anything. But I want to at least state clearly the basics of what I do. So I'm a cell biologist. The point of my work is to understand how cells interact with one another and the environment around them. And that's pretty complicated, naturally. Broadly speaking, one cell has lots and lots of things going on inside it. A single cell can basically exist as a single living entity. It is able to manufacture its own energy, all the proteins that it needs, break down all the stuff that it doesn't need, replicate its own DNA. Each cell has its own set of mini organs or organelles that help it to perform these functions, and on the surface it has different types of receptors that allow it to sense the environment around it, much like we use our own sensors. It can take up surrounding nutrients just as we do when we eat. It can break down those nutrients into constituents that are useful to the cell, and it can send out its own signals in order to communicate with other cells in its community. In the body, that community is usually cells within the organ that cell resides and functions, and cells belonging to specific organs have organ-specific jobs, which is a big part of why complex multicellular organisms like humans are able to exist.
It's an interesting one, really, because you've got the like you could look at the cells as functioning independently, and then as an aggregate of cells form what we consider a single organism. But then you look at ants, for example, which you could characterize a colony of ants as one single organism.
Because they work together.
They're just on a more macro level than we think of cells. But it's essentially the same thing. Is you've got these little independent units that are dependent on their surrounding units and communicate with chemical or electrical messages with each other.
Absolutely.
It's very, very similar models. And maybe we shouldn't be thinking of an ant as one individual is one ant. It's actually the ant is the colony.
It's a bit of ant.
Yeah, it's a piece of ant.
Some ant. I love that.
Just carve off a piece of ant there.
I love that. That's what you were thinking during that. I was thinking church pianists. They've got an organ-specific job. That's what I was thinking during that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that cricket sound again.
Science, Alice. Science. Tell us science.
The communication is important because the organ needs to function as a whole in order to allow the host of the organ to make use of it and survive. I'm explaining this as a little background context for what I want to talk about today, but just to keep in mind that the human body is made up of 3 trillion cells, and very broadly speaking, the function and communication of cells is heavily reliant on a suite of proteins that build up into very complex signalling pathways that I'm not going to explain because they're too fucking complicated. Another way cells can communicate across long distances are through the release of hormones, which can travel through the bloodstream and interact with receptors on cells a long distance away from their inception. What I want to talk about today is how the body senses and responds to its environment and how that affects our sleep pattern. I want to talk about circadian rhythms. In humans, circadian rhythms are built in cycles. They exist within a 24-hour period, regardless of the environment. However, they can be tweaked and adjusted based on the surrounding environment. Humans are diurnal, which means we're active in the day, and generally we sleep at night.
That's not necessarily true for me. No. That's only partly true for me, I think.
Every element of the human body has a role in sensing and interacting with our environment and surviving based on that environment, and a big part of that requires our body to understand physically the difference between night and day. Over time, we've evolved to be awake and active in the day and asleep and inactive during the night. It brings us plenty of benefits, and therefore it's something we've evolved to maintain. In order to be awake in the daylight and asleep in the dark, we have developed a system called the circadian rhythm, and our entire body is tuned into this system. We have variations from person to person. We can talk about owl and lark personalities, but our bodies are still picking up on the signals from the world to tell us to be awake in the daylight and asleep in the dark.
Owl personality, Marsh?
Yeah.
So you're an owl personality? Not a lark personality?
No, I'm definitely not a lark personality.
Because you do like a lark.
I do like a lark.
You like a lark, you like japes.
I do like a lark, I like japes, but I'm mostly an owl personality because I like to swallow mice whole and then vomit up the intestinal sacs. So that wins. That wins.
Okay.
Good. An important part of the body involved in regulating this is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN.
Everyone went to Mary Poppins now.
I was going to say that's so Mary Poppins. So close. It's fragile. It's very fragile. Guys, do it, Nicholas.
So the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, is a region within the hypothalamus of the brain. It receives signals from light-sensitive cells in the retina of the eye and relays signals to other regions of the hypothalamus, such as the pineal gland. The response of these different brain regions is all related to protein expression. The SCN has genes that are expressed in response to light, and there are loads of proteins that have been linked to regulating this cycle. I'm not going to talk much about it because it's more signalling pathways and no one cares about that, apart from me. We still don't fully understand it, but one of the important outputs is when the SCN signals to the pineal gland, which is responsible for producing a hormone called melatonin. Melatonin is a really important hormone in the control of our sleep patterns. It causes drowsiness and reduces body temperature. Its levels are increased towards the end of the day in the hours when you would be winding down ready to sleep, and the levels peak in the middle of the night, which is always also when your body is at its coolest.
Is melatonin the one that gets trashed when you look at daylight at night time?
Yes.
Is it that one? Is it?
It is that one.
Which is why people's iPhone screens go orange now when it goes dark at night.
We'll come back to blue light filters.
Okay.
I see. Okay.
The levels of melatonin begin to drop just as you're getting ready to wake up, so it's a signal to wake you up. Melatonin does a lot. One review I read said melatonin has antinociceptive, antidepressant, anxiolytic, anti-neophobic, locomotor activity regulating, neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory, pain modulating, blood pressure reducing, retinal, vascular, anti-tumour and antioxidant effects.
Blimey.
These effects are produced by the binding of melatonin to different types of receptors on different types of cells, long distances away from its production and release in the brain. And the melatonin cycle isn't entirely dependent on light, but it is influenced by light. We figured out that light suppresses melatonin release. We've even figured out that we're more sensitive to short blue light wavelengths than we are to longer wavelengths, which is why you have blue light filters on phones to reduce the melatonin suppression caused by lighted electronic devices. But the problem is, because melatonin does all this stuff in the body, there are lots of recommendations that we should use it to treat various things, which is what we got a question from a listener about recently.
So all that was preamble?
All of that was preamble.
All of that was preamble. Okay.
So we're now going to the listener question section. Dun, 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 dun.
When I get going on science, Lisa emailed us asking, I would like to ask about melatonin. I think I heard you say on the show way back that there isn't much to back up the claims about melatonin working. And since I'm using it myself, I would really want to hear more on what studies there are, how good they are, and what conclusions they come to. My subjective experience is that it helps, and I would be very happy to hear that it really doesn't. Since I'm very sceptical, it can't be placebo, can it? I'll not let you comment on the placebo comment.
I'll leave that. I'll let that go. I'll let that slide. It's fine.
So Lisa's saying we spoke about this before?
Yes, I
don't remember anything about. I don't remember anything about what we covered last episode. So my brain is not the repository or archive of what the shows are. But I don't remember ever hearing it.
As far as I'm aware, well, as long as I've been on the show, I don't remember us ever talking about melatonin, even as a throwaway comment, because I don't think I would have been part of saying it doesn't work. because there's evidence it does.
But could you have been talking about it, though? Because I might explain why I didn't hear it because I wasn't listening.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You found an episode that you thought we talked about it on. I listened back to that episode. No. So I listened to an entire episode of Skeptics with a K from ages ago that I didn't need to.
Was it one that you weren't on? Because
no, it was one that I was on.
Because it could have closed that gap in episodes you haven't heard before.
Well, I mean, if we did talk about it in the past and we said some nonsense about it, well, that's how the cookie crumbles. Let's fix our historic bullshit, Alice.
Lisa didn't actually mention what she's taking melatonin for, but in her full email, she did mention that in Sweden, which is where she's living, it is only available with a prescription, which makes me suspect she's taking it under instruction of a doctor, hopefully, and therefore likely for one of the cases where taking melatonin might be effective.
Yeah.
So we can start there. There is evidence that taking melatonin can be effective for people with certain sleep disorders and to help with jet lag. Any occasion, basically, when your body isn't fully reading and responding to its environment properly. So there's a literature review in 2004 for Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality in the US, which summarised a few findings. Firstly, they looked at the data in normal sleepers and found that although there was some evidence that normal sleepers fell asleep more quickly with an increased efficiency when taking melatonin, both of these changes were on a small scale and therefore had no clinical significance. They did note that the effect on sleep efficiency was most notable in daytime sleepers, which may point to a use for melatonin in night shift workers. Next, they looked at people with primary sleep disorders and found that there was a positive and clinically significant effect of taking melatonin for patients with delayed sleep phase syndrome. Patients with this sleep disorder can reduce the time it takes them to fall asleep by taking melatonin. It just gets your body ready to go to sleep.
Yeah.
In patients with insomnia, they found no significant effect. There were very, very slight changes in sleep onset latency for insomnia, but it wasn't dose dependent, hinting that it might just be an artifact.
Okay, so it's kind of saying if you can get to sleep but it takes a long time, then it might be useful. But if you're having trouble even sleeping at all, then it's not going to make you sleepier.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
For secondary sleep disorders, there was no clinically significant effect, although there was an increase in total sleep duration. And for people with restricted sleep, such as night shift workers or people suffering with jet lag, there was no effect on sleep onset, sleep efficiency, or wakefulness upon waking, but there was an increase in total sleep duration.
But that seems like that's the most worthless thing, is if you don't sleep quicker, you don't feel better as a result of it, but you are sleeping longer.
Yeah.
That sounds shit.
I mean, that is shit. That's also a symptom of depression, and it's pretty shit.
Yeah.
You kind of want the opposite, really, don't you? You want to be able to get to sleep really quickly, feel really refreshed, but not sleep for very long.
Yeah, like a supercharge.
Yeah. You want to cure sleep. I mean, I might have mentioned this once or twice before.
Are you thinking melatonin is the way to do that?
Might be the way to do it.
Yeah. You're endorsing that, are you? Because that's a radical 180 of your previous position on this show about melatonin, apparently.
I don't know that I've ever said anything about melatonin, like ever in my life, to anyone.
You know what it was? It was Col. I bet it was bloody Colin. Bet it was Colin. Which is weird because Colin didn't even exist. He was an actor. He was played by an actor.
No. Well, it was played by Alice.
It's
almost an anagram. Colin, Alice. It's very close.
It is almost in that they've got two letters in common.
Well, they've got the I and the C and the L.
Oh, I didn't think of the C. Yeah, but it's not the same type of C. It's a hard C and a soft C.
Yeah, well, that's not how anagrams work much.
Well, that's true.
Good, I'm glad we figured that out. So basically, in some cases, melatonin treatment might help, but it's not going to cure all your sleeping ills, unfortunately. But the problem is, in some countries, melatonin is available over the counter as a supplement, which means people take it when they don't need it. They may take it outside of medical supervision. And with something that has such time dependency as melatonin levels, you need it a certain number of hours before you go to sleep. You need a spike and you need it to drop off as you're about ready to wake up. It's important to take it correctly.
I mean, just be clear, you were saying that before, that there are some things that it's useful for, and if you're taking it as a result of having consulted with a doctor who said to take it,
absolutely,
then we're not saying stop by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. But there is a problem that it is taken incorrectly and it's taken for the wrong things. Of course, people take it for conditions. You know, you get a supplement over the counter. People decide that means it's good for you. Yeah. They take it for conditions that there's no good evidence it will actually help. There are a range of conditions for which there is possibly maybe some preliminary evidence for melatonin use, maybe tentatively, which includes cluster headaches, tinnitus, seasonal affective disorder, sleep problems associated with autism, anxiety, and gallstones. Interestingly.
Gallstones?
Because it's
Where
also...
are you taking the melatonin?
It's also an antioxidant. So it can...
And those are obviously miracle cures for everything, as we know.
Miracle cures for everything.
Yeah.
In cases where you might have cell damage from an increase in reactive oxygen species and you might want to take an antioxidant, melatonin can do that job. It may also help protect cells against damage from radiation, again, due to its role as an antioxidant, because radiation triggers the production of reactive oxygen species and they can be damaging to cells.
Gotcha.
There is no evidence it will protect against or treat cancer, although it is an area of ongoing research due to its antioxidant properties. And so it's one of those things that there's kind of interesting areas to look at with melatonin, but we're a long way away from having anywhere near enough research to say that it's worth taking for most of those conditions. The only thing that it can work for is very specific types of sleep disorder.
Sleep disorders, yeah, I see.
Melatonin is by no means a safe supplement. It's really not harmful in a huge way, but it is. It does have problems with it. It can be addictive. It can damage your liver. You shouldn't take it if you have liver or kidney damage or suffer from addiction to other substances that might damage your liver or kidneys. It's also been shown in animals to have a potential link to cancer in high doses. Most people take it for up to 3 months when they're supervised by a doctor, and therefore we have very little data on the long-term effects.
Yeah.
And you also don't need all that much in the body to have an effect, meaning unregulated supplements may have a far higher dose than those which have been studied and deemed safe. Receptors for melatonin are mostly found in the brain and eyes. Its specific activity is there, but it is a hormone. It's very soluble. It can travel long distances, and when it passes through membranes into cells, who knows what it's doing? Cell signaling is a really complicated area of study. We have 20,000 genes, each of which encode for a protein. Each protein might have several different versions of the same protein doing different things. We definitely haven't identified all of them or all of the overlapping functions. Who knows? We might have another type of melatonin receptor living inside of cells other than brain cells. Taking random supplements that haven't been fully studied is never without risks. And science doesn't find every contraindication. You only have to look at thalidomide to see that a major, at the time, unidentified contraindication for the drug was fetal development. In answer to Lisa's question on whether melatonin is an effective treatment, the answer is, as it often is when it comes to science, it's complicated.
Okay, so we got a question in from Sarah. And Sarah said, I've been really enjoying your investigations into placebo effect and echo the sentiments of Marsh and Alice that you should write a book.
Yep.
I mean, she's
someone called it a placebo book.
I mean, she's wrong about that.
No.
You should.
Even so. So Sarah sent me a link to a news story talking about a new paper on the placebo effect.
Nice.
So thanks very much for that, Sarah. Also thanks to Tim, who sent in the same article, and also Chris, and Sam, and Bob, and Tegan. Tegan was the name of a Doctor Who companion as well. So okay. I've never been contacted by a real-life Tegan before.
Tegan.
I was quite happy to receive a message from a real-life Tegan.
Are there any companion names that you've not heard from yet?
Many.
Go on.
Many.
Give us a couple.
I've never had an Adric.
No Adrics?
No.
Adrics of the world, right in.
I've never had an Adric or a Turlo.
A Turlo?
Or a Perpigillium.
Perpigillium?
Never had a Perpigillium.
Adrics of the world, right in.
But in fairness, it was Sarah who wrote in first, so thanks, Sarah. Also, the name of a Doctor Who companion.
Yeah, good.
Anyway, they
so
also.
It's Bob, isn't it? Or is that Bill?
Bill.
There's Bill. Modern one's called Bill.
No Bobs.
Don't think there's been a companion called Bob.
Zero Bobs.
Not that I can think of, but there has been Chris in the books. There has been a Sam in the books as well.
Oh, okay.
All these people sent in various articles covering this new paper, the details of which I'll come to in a moment. But they sent in various articles which cover this paper, including a piece from the Pop Science Facebook page, I Fucking Love Science, whose founder, I think, was interviewed on Skeptic's Guide, actually, a few years ago.
Yes, she was, yeah.
Might not even have been a few years ago. But
last year, I think.
She doesn't own it anymore, though, does she? I thought she sold it.
I don't know. Don't know.
I think it's all muddy and murky.
But she's obviously aware of the skeptic community.
Yeah.
The coverage on IFL Science I found particularly annoying.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Because
they're really hit and miss, aren't they?
They can be really hit and miss. This piece was published on their Facebook page with a note that said, if you're not completely blown away by the power of placebo, then you don't know enough about it. It's the closest thing I've ever seen to actual magic.
Oh, God.
I mean, personally, I think they're exactly backwards. If you are blown away by the power of placebo, then you don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
But the commenters on Facebook, and bear in mind this is a pro-science page, so this audience is biased towards people who are into science. The commenters were just as bad. The comments underneath had things like, it's not the placebo that's impressive, it's the power of the human mind. It's the power of the mind, but unfortunately that means the more intelligent you are, the less likely it is to work on you. What the fuck are you talking about? And this person who said it's the power of the mind, like how dudes can sit naked in Arctic temperatures and meditate for hours when they should be slowly dying.
No,
and they definitely still are slowly dying.
I saw that as well, and I saw people saying, yeah, placebo's amazing. Did you know that if you take two placebos, it's more powerful than taking them? Oh, God, you got a long, long uphill battle with your book, Mike.
I saw someone citing the knee surgery study, saying, they did this knee, except they described the study wrong. They said that what they did is they took
Ben Goldacre?
They took people into the operating theatre and they did the ID and the scrubs and everyone thing, but then did nothing and put them back. Well, actually, that isn't what they did. They cut them open, but then didn't perform the procedure and just sewed them back up again. So they described the study wrong and then said, but it still works and everything. They said, no. What turns out that operation is bollocks. That's why, and they've stopped doing it since because of that study.
The operation is bollocks, yeah.
It's crazy. But my favourite comment was this one. Somebody who said, that's my argument about alternative medicine. If the person gets a placebo out of it and is cured, then it has done its job. It's better than taking real drugs that have major side effects. Again, this underlines what we've been saying on this show about the public perception of placebo for a while. People do really think it's some sort of quasi-magical thing, and they really do use it to justify the use of bogus interventions on people, and sometimes that is in place of real medicine.
Yeah, I think so. And it's two things. It's one, it's why we need to spread more broadly the fact that the placebo effect does not have these magical properties that people are attributing it to, or people have been conditioned to, ironically, to condition to attribute to the placebo effect. And two, it's why we need to put in place blockages, things that stop alternative medicines being administered. Because even people who are fans of science will say, well, the alternative medicine, we know it's giving a placebo effect, and we know that's very powerful, so let's carry on allowing the NHS to give out alternative medicine. Let's carry on allowing charities to promote alternative medicine because, well, we don't know that they're causing harm until we can prove that they're definitely causing harm, that at least they'll get a placebo effect, and that's a very good thing. No, this is all wrong. We need to turn this whole fucking ship around through every tool we have available to us. Therefore, everybody, make sure you submit to the Charity Commission's consultation on CAM charities.
It's crafty, get a plug in there. When a plug.
Closes tomorrow. As of this going out.
As of this going
final
out.
Deadline is midnight, 11:59 p.m. on Friday the 19th. So if you haven't yet, please do. We know for a fact that What Doctors Don't Tell You and the Society of Homeopaths and lots of others, and in fact, as we're recording this, tomorrow I'm joining a webinar for a group of alternative health practitioners who are sharing tips on how to respond to that consultation to keep their therapies open. They don't know that I've signed up for that webinar. I'm going to be listening to them talking about all the nasty elements of the work that I've been doing and how they're going to circumvent that and try and push for anecdotes to trump accurate information. We need to make sure that we have enough voices out there to turn it around. So, yeah.
That's a really important thing to do. So, this article was titled, Placebos Work Even When Patients Know What They Are. Which is not news to me, to be honest, because we talked about this on the show a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's not new.
When there was another paper that reported the same thing.
No.
And oddly enough, these findings, these data, actually support the position that I advocate, that being that the placebo effect, as it is widely understood, doesn't exist, and to the extent that it has any real effect, it's not all that interesting. Whether you know you are taking a sugar pill or not doesn't change regression to the mean.
Yes.
Doesn't make a blind bit of difference.
Yeah.
Whether you're taking a sugar pill or not does not change the natural course of the disease or spontaneous improvement. Many of the effects that comprise the results seen in placebo arms of clinical trials are not modified by the beliefs and expectations. Some of them are, but many of those effects are not modified by the beliefs and expectations of the patients. So it's no surprise that placebos continue to work no matter what the patient believes about the intervention. It's only in the quasi-magical narrative of placebo that this is a surprising finding.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
This latest paper is actually a systematic review. And it controls for regression and spontaneous improvement by comparing to no treatment, which is cool. The paper is titled Effects of Placebos Without Deception Compared with No Treatment, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. And it was, or perhaps will be, because the article says it's been reviewed and accepted but not yet proofread or typeset. So the article will be published in the Journal of Evidence-Based Medicine. Briefly from the paper, they say surveys from around the world estimate that 17 to 97% of doctors have prescribed placebos in routine practice.
17 to 97.
17 to 97.
A confidence interval of 80%.
That is a hell of a range. I'm impressed at that. 17 to 97% is amazing.
We just know it's not that top 3 or the bottom 17.
It's definitely not everyone.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not very few people.
Yeah.
It's somewhere between 17 and 97%. Ridiculous. The paper continues, while early estimates of placebo effects were exaggerated, which they provide 2 citations for, the first being Beecher's original paper, The Powerful Placebo, the second being the 1997 paper by Kindler that we talked about last episode.
The third being the last episode of Skeptics which dissected them.
So it was nice to see them acknowledging that, the stuff Beecher was claiming is hugely exaggerated. While early estimates of the placebo effect were exaggerated, it is widely acknowledged that placebos are able to offer some benefit to patients suffering from conditions such as pain and depression. And I think that's interesting wording there. They describe it as can be of benefit to patients.
Yes.
Doesn't mean it's going to cure them. Yeah. Doesn't even necessarily mean that it's going to improve them. It just benefits them, which could just be as simple as by modifying their biases.
Yes, yeah. Also, it's widely acknowledged. I'd have rather said it's widely accepted, because it is quite widely accepted. It's wrong, but it's widely accepted.
The authors searched the literature for papers comparing some diagnosed medical condition, whatever it couldn't just be, feeling a bit blur. It had to be a diagnosed medical condition. They searched for the literature for papers looking for some diagnosed medical condition with an open-label placebo and a no-treatment arm.
Okay.
They only included randomized trials, and they excluded any non-clinical trials on healthy volunteers. So it's only people who are actually sick. They wound up with 5 papers, which is not spectacular. They initially identified like 394 papers, and then had to throw all but 5 of them away for various reasons. So they wound up with 5 papers, not brilliant. Across the 5 papers, there were 260 patients, which is fair, but could be better. And they found overall that open-label placebos, that is placebos where the patients know they're placebos, have a beneficial effect for patients with a p-value of 0.00001, which is a small and significant p-value. We already know that they are controlling for regression and for spontaneous improvement with their no-treatment comparison, and open label means they are controlling for tricking the patient into healing themselves, which is the traditional narrative given for placebo. If you believe it will cure you, it will. What they aren't adequately controlling for here is bias. If you are open label, you have necessarily fucked your blinding.
Yes,
you have to be unblind to be open label. So there is no blinding here. So in the initial instance, we're prone to bias immediately. But also, when the open label placebos are administered, they are often accompanied by messages from clinicians along the lines of placebo pills have been shown in rigorous clinical testing to produce significant mind-body healing processes.
So it's heavily biased.
So that just as readily primes the patient's biases as telling them they're getting drugs.
Yeah.
They're saying, now here's a pill and there's no actual medicine in it, but our studies show it can prompt real, heavy mind-body interactions that promote self-healing, blah-de-blah-de-blah. You're just as readily priming their biases as you would be if it was, this is medicine, it'll make you better.
Yeah.
So those patients are more likely to report an improvement even when there is no improvement.
Of course, yeah.
Or they're more likely to exaggerate a real improvement. If you have a real improvement because of spontaneous improvement or because of regression to the mean, and you're expecting an improvement, you might be more likely to exaggerate that, where the people in the no treatment arm will report the improvement without the exaggeration or perhaps underplay it.
Yes, yeah.
And the difference there, again, the patients aren't any different, but the data says that they are.
Yeah.
The authors assessed each of the 5 papers for a risk of bias, and they conclude overall that there was a moderate risk of bias in these papers. Personally, I think they're underestimating here because they look for several bias risk factors, such as the risk of selection bias, the fact that they're unblinded, incomplete reporting of data, which gives us a selection bias, a reporting bias, rather, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All but one of those papers has at least 2 risk factors listed as unclear. We don't know. There isn't enough information in the paper that tells us how big a risk there is that this kind of bias is present.
Could they have characterised their bias as the chances of bias are somewhere between 17 and 97%?
I don't see how you can have even a single unclear risk of bias in a paper and then still come out and say, well, this paper has moderate risk.
Yeah.
You don't know.
It might be a massive risk.
It might be huge risk because you've got one area at least where you have absolutely no clue.
No clue, yeah.
You don't get to say no clue means zero effect.
Yeah.
That could actually bias the entire paper. You've got no idea. So I don't think for my money you get to count unclear as 0, and they're massively underestimating the risk of bias here, potentially. All that said, the paper concludes, open-label placebos appear to have positive clinical effects compared to no treatment. Caution is warranted when interpreting these results due to the limited number of trials identified, the lack of assessor blinding, and the fact that positive messages were included alongside the open-label placebos, which is a more or less reasonable conclusion to draw from the data presented, although it fails to draw attention to the major problem, which is that the overall risk of bias for these papers is not moderate, as the paper claims, but actually unclear. And even if it were moderate, I still don't think... even a moderate risk of bias could be enough to skew the data in favour of the placebo.
I mean, if it's a question between moderate risk of bias or placebo is magic.
Yeah.
Moderate risk of bias is
we
your
know
Occam's
biases
razor.
happen.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So, of course, while the authors acknowledge that the effects of placebo may be exaggerated, they might even agree. The authors of this paper might be completely on my page and think that the placebo effect is largely illusory. That's not how the public are reading this paper. They're reading this as further evidence of the magical power of the magical placebo effect. So that's what I reckon to that paper, Sarah.
That was a listener question answer.
And Ted and James and Sue, and I'm just making names up.
Well,
here.
that's it. I mean, technically, you've answered 8 listener questions at once. They were just all the same questions. So you've afforded, rather than answer each one individually, you've amalgamated that into one long answer.
Yeah, I've done a meta-analysis on that question. I've done several meta-analyses on the questions.
Yeah.
So if you've got a question that you want to write in, podcast@merseysoundskeptics.org.uk. You can contact us on Twitter and on Facebook if you want as well. But the email address is probably
that's the best way to get to us.
The best way.
And
to
you
get
can
in
send
touch.
us a voice clip of your question.
We've had fewer people doing that recently, sending in the voice clips. But send in a voice clip if you want to ask your question on air. If you want to get off on the.
Are we still ending it with Mike Isabella? 30
I think
seconds
we should
long.
end it with Marsh Isabella after he was mean to me at the fucking prison escape room.
30 seconds long for the question. You got 3 seconds to say what you like after that. That's going to get cut.
One person that I will say cannot write in with a question is Andy Wilson, because I'm not having his voice on this show.
Never.
It's just it's never going to happen.
That's true.
It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So QED tickets have been on sale for a little bit now, week and a bit now.
Just over.
So that's cool, and the tickets are flying off the shelves.
They're doing well,
which is brilliant. I'm very pleased that I managed to do an Apple Pay integration.
Yes,
so
one person has used it.
We have seen at least one person has used. I need to go through the stats and see.
Can you actually see the stats?
Yeah, and see whether it was worth all that time of putting in the fucking Apple Pay integration. But I put in the Apple Pay integration, and that was nice. The dinner's selling very well as well, which is good. We actually put more dinner tickets on this year.
Yes,
in response to people. We usually end up with a list of people saying, "Oh, I wanted a ticket for the dinner," so we tried to put a few more on this year. So
I think you've judged it about right this year.
I think we've pitched it about right, which is good. I think we're in the right region. So tickets are available now from the QED website, which is qedcon.org, and you'll see details of the speakers that we've announced so far. And we've also got a couple of videos up of previous events.
We have
talks if you want to go up there. So QED is going to be fun. If you're not familiar with QED, go listen to old episodes of the show.
We bang on about it all the time.
We bang on about it a lot, and you're going to hear about it every fucking episode between now and October.
Yeah, just listen to other Skeptical podcasts. They'll talk about it a lot anyway. That thing at this point, we put the effort into the actual conference itself, and everyone else is like, "Oh, that was really good. Yeah, we should talk about that a bit." So everyone's doing that for us.
We've also got Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub.
We have Karen Douglas.
We got Karen Douglas, who's coming down to talk about conspiracies and conspiracy theories. That's going to be in our regular venue, which is the Vines on Lime Street. It's quite funny, the Vines now, because every other building on that road has been knocked down.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's only the Vines left standing.
Is it listed, the Vines? It's got an old look about it.
I think it
must
might be a
because
listed
that's
building.
why
They've got rid of it by now.
It's not wheelchair accessible. Because it's a listed building.
Well, it is in the sense that we've got a ramp.
We have made it wheelchair accessible.
Because
Forge an access point.
We have bought a ramp that we put on there. So if you are a wheelchair user or if you've got other mobility problems, ramp access is available.
Yeah.
That is true.
We'd appreciate, you don't have to give us a heads up, but we'd appreciate a heads up so we can have the ramp ready. But otherwise, it is fully wheelchair accessible.
That is true.
Sometimes they lock the disabled toilet. We have to go and shout at them.
I usually try and keep an eye on that. And,
we get that opened.
Unlock it.
And make them unlock the disabled toilet. So they try, bless them.
And move the big floor polisher out of the way, which weighs a ton.
That's right in the way. Yeah. But we sort all that out, so you don't have to.
It's unhelpful. So that is tonight from 7:30 in the Vines on Lime Street. So if you're in the Liverpool area, you should come along to that. And Incredulous, of course. There is a new episode of Incredulous that was published earlier this week, featuring Andy Wilson and guests, including Carrie Poppy, Brian Ego, and not Marsh, actually, for a fucking change. So that's available from the Merseyside Skeptics website, or you can get that from iTunes or Stitcher. So aside from that, that is all we have time for.
I think so.
All that remains is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Cheers.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been the Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.